Hello and welcome to Season 6, Episode 11 of Conservation Conversations with BirdLife South Africa. I'm your host, Kurt Martin, coming to you live from a very chilly Joburg. Before we get into tonight's talks, a quick look at our upcoming program. On the 8th of July, we have Dr. Chris Lotz coming online to speak to us about lists and listing in general and how our South African list is affected by international changes, such as the recent announcement of AV List. Later in July, we're hosting the operations manager for the Mouse-Free Marion project, Keith Springer, who will give us an update on the progress of the project, as well as his unique insight into the immense amount of planning that goes into an island eradication of this size. And in early August, we will be joined by Odette Curtis and Rob Simmons, from whom we will learn about the beautiful and threatened black harrier. On to tonight's show, where we're joined by my colleagues at BirdLife South Africa, Dr. Kyle Lloyd and Dr. Marlize Muller. The topic for tonight's talk is a fascinating one: 5 years of wetland conservation for the white-winged flufftail, where we have come from and where we are going. Looking forward to learning all about wetlands and high elevation wetlands in particular, and learning a bit more about that very cryptic species that few of us have been fortunate to see, the white-winged flufftail. Before I hand over to our speakers and formally introduce them, I just want to tell you all a little bit more about them. So they're both colleagues of mine at BirdLife South Africa, and Kyle focuses on wetland conservation. In fact, he's the Wetland Conservation Project Manager and the Rock Jumper Fellow of White-winged Flufftail Conservation. I doubt that there are many more people in the country that are more experienced with white-winged flufftails than Kyle and Marlize. And Kyle's experience extends from his master's in conservation biology at UCT, his PhD in zoology from the University of Pretoria, all the way to having spent a year on Marion Island, as well as the past years of experience in high elevation wetlands of South Africa. And Dr. Marlize Muller is the Steenkampsberg Conservation Officer within the Landscape Conservation Program's Wetland Conservation Project. What a mouthful. She's based in northern Mpumalanga, along with Kyle, and focuses on expanding protected area networks in the Steenkampsberg Mountains and providing post-declaration support to landowners. She holds master's and PhD degrees in environmental sciences from Northwest University, and I'm very excited for you to meet them. So without further ado, let me hand over to Dr. Kyle.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We are very excited to share with you the progress we've made with the project and also give a little bit more information about what we're currently working on. So we will be presenting a flagship species approach to wetland conservation, how we have used the threatened white-winged flufftail to conserve its wetland habitat. This presentation is divided into two parts. The first part presents the project vision, or the model that we try to follow. And then the second part will go into the specific project objectives. So for those who do not know, the white-winged flufftail is one of 9 flufftail species endemic to sub-Saharan Africa. The entire genus only occurs within sub-Saharan Africa. And the bird gets its common name from these diagnostic white secondary flight feathers. So if you're fortunate enough to be walking in a wetland and you flush a white-winged flufftail, you'll likely just see a flash of white before it disappears again into the sedge meadows. The species is extremely cryptic and elusive, and this has posed quite a challenge in terms of trying to research and better understand the bird, which then also presents challenges for its conservation. But we do know that it breeds in high elevation wetlands during the summer season, or also our wet season. And the localities seem to be concentrated along the eastern escarpment of South Africa within our wet or mesic grassland biome. The white-winged flufftail is a wetland specialist, preferring intact sedge meadows with shallow water. And this is very important for us because the presence of the bird is an indication of a healthy, functioning wetland system. These sedge meadows are very easily replaced by other species if there's a disturbance within the wetlands catchment or within the system itself. The white-winged flufftail is listed as globally critically endangered according to the IUCN criteria. And this threat status really comes from the fact that the bird is facing a lot of challenges with the destruction and degradation of its wetland habitat. And that's why a lot of our conservation work for the species is focused on trying to preserve uh, wetlands. A The last national biodiversity assessment for South Africa found that wetlands, along with estuaries, are one of the most threatened and unprotected ecosystem types in the country. And this is unfortunately not just the case for South Africa, but for wetlands across the world. They are such complex ecosystems that require a very in-depth understanding of how water interacts with the landscape. So we adopt a flagship species approach when we are trying to conserve our wetlands. The white-winged flufftail acts as an ambassador, icon, or symbol for wetland habitat. And there are certain characteristics that make a species suitable to be a flagship or ambassador. It needs to be charismatic. So for those who know the white-winged flufftail, it's highly sought after within the birding community. It needs to be representative of the habitat or the issue that it is trying to represent. And so for us, it is an indication of a healthy functioning wetland, as I mentioned. The bird is also threatened, and this really helps us to gain resources, support, political will to try and conserve the bird. There's a storytelling element around it. The fact that it's so much of its biology remains unknown to science creates this mystery around it. And when we do find those fall in those knowledge gaps, it can tell quite an interesting story. The bird is not so very much accessible, and because of that elusive behavior. And we are working hard on trying to present ways in which people can engage and experience the white-winged flufftail for themselves. There is a lot of multi-stakeholder interest around the white-winged flufftail because it falls under several international conventions, like the African Eurasian Migratory Waterbird Agreement. And South Africa is a contracting party to this agreement. And so there's also a mandate for government to fulfill conservation objectives for it. And we're very fortunate to have the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and Environment White-winged Flufftail National Working Group. We meet annually, and this brings a whole lot of stakeholders to the table to discuss the progress we've made and what we plan ahead for the bird. There's also a societal and cultural link, and this is namely as a result of the wetland ecosystem services that wetlands provide, which I'll go into more detail in another slide. So this is the approach that we take to trying to conserve wetland habitat. We try to address things like wetland management, developing tools and knowledge bases to improve the management of these complex ecosystems. We look at trying to expand the protected area network onto private land as well. And so Marlize is working really hard on that in the Steenkampsberg, which is an area with a lot of wetlands in northern Mpumalanga around Bellstrom. We ran just declare, we also provide post-declaration support, and so we're committed to providing landowners with the help they need to steward these ecosystems. Wetland policy and advocacy, so we engage with the public participation process and try to help consultants with addressing developments that are possibly incompatible with wetland conservation, and then also raising awareness about wetlands. But I think it's very important for us to actually define what is a wetland, and there are many definitions out there to try to capture the complexity of these habitats. Essentially, it's water that is slowing down within the ecosystem, spreading out, creating these anoxic water conditions or soil conditions. So that's the lack of oxygen. And that makes for really interesting chemistry within the soil. And it creates a challenge for species to adapt and survive within an environment that is very low in oxygen. So at least in South Africa, we've adopted the National Water Act definition. So land which is transitional between terrestrial and aquatic systems, where the water table is usually at or near the surface, or the land is periodically covered with shallow water, and which under normal circumstances supports or would support vegetation typically adapted to life in saturated soil. So when you're walking out in the grasslands, and you'll often see as you approach a wetland, there's a very distinct water gradient, and you'll see changes within the vegetation community, so reflecting those different saturations in the soil. And as you approach the permanently saturated zone. And then each vegetation community also hosts different species as well. And so if you're standing in a wetland and you're looking down, this is typically what you see. And this is white-winged flufftail habitat. So it's these sedge meadows, a very low herbaceous vegetation community mixed with grasses and herbs. And maybe you'll also see standing water. And the bird is essentially using this understory to complete its life cycle, avoid predation, and so forth. But why does all of this matter? Why are we putting so much effort in trying to conserve our wetlands? It is not only a benefit for the white-winged flufftail and the species that wetlands host, but there are also many ecosystem services that wetlands provide to society that we can benefit from. There are many regulating, supporting, provisioning, and cultural services that wetlands provide, particularly with water, cleaning it, holding it for long periods of time, also storing carbon as part of climate change mitigation. So those anoxic conditions really hold a lot of vegetation that hasn't fully decomposed within the substrate of wetlands. So now we're moving on to the project objectives. And firstly, we'll discuss wetland management. So in starting this project, it became very evident that one of the major threats to at least the habitat type that the white-winged flufftail uses is a mismanagement of wetland drivers. And particularly in these grassland biomes, which are agriculturally dominated, there are a lot of issues which are may not so obvious as wetland destruction, but are more subtle in changing inputs from water, sediment, nutrients, which in turn affect the vegetation community used by the bird. And so it became very apparent to us that we needed to try and communicate the wealth of information that's sitting in specialist reports and in literature to the people who are actually on the ground stewarding wetlands. And so we endeavored to communicate concise and practical management recommendations. And we included many illustrations as well as real-world case study for where these recommendations have been applied. And we invited a lot of guest authors to make these case studies. So the target audience is really landowners, farmers, traditional authorities, protected area managers, municipalities, as well as the groups responsible for advising them. So they can take this document to the groups that they are serving, such as NGOs, amongst others. And this map sort of highlights the scope of the guidelines. So it covers the areas where the wetlands, where these guidelines are applicable to these wetlands. And we try to look at the whole of Southern Africa as well, not just South Africa. There are distinct parts to the guidelines. So the first part, wetland ecology, really gives land users an understanding of how wetlands work, how they operate, what are the drivers that they need to be aware of, what are the threats that they need to be aware of, and why does it matter as well. And then we expand more into the wetland management. So we deal with topics like delineating your wetland, assessing your wetland's health, how do you build infrastructure in the catchment of your wetland or within your wetland? How do you graze your wetland? How do you burn your wetland? So these are very important topics that we've tried to cover. And then for the land user who wants to go the extra mile, we also provide a section on wetland conservation, and some of the topics that I'll be talking about with Marlize, they can also apply to their wetland ecosystem. And then we end off with wetland support, so just providing those additional resources if they want to read more, as well as contact details for any individuals that they can talk to. And so the guidelines have been recently launched. You may have seen this flyer going around. And the guidelines are freely available. You can download it as an ebook. And we also have limited hard copies that we've printed, and some of them are at head office. So if you are someone who is responsible for managing wetlands or advising people who manage wetlands, please feel free to go and collect a copy for yourself. Right, moving on to wetland protection, and Marlize will take us away. Thanks.
Thank you, Kyle. Yeah, so wetland protection is all about safeguarding wetlands and their catchments by expanding protected area network. Next slide, please. Okay, so South Africa offers a range of protected area types, with each agreement type designed to match different levels of biodiversity importance, state support, landowner commitment, and ultimately the degree of site protection. For maximum conservation impact, we focus on nature reserve and protected environment agreements. These offer the highest levels of protection and deliver the greatest conservation benefits. So the declaration process begins with obtaining landowner willingness and support. When landowners are committed to conservation, we can be confident that our limited time resources will be protected through legal security and long-term stewardship. Once we have landowner commitment, we conduct a site assessment to ensure that the proposed land meets the ecological criteria and conservation standards. We then submit the proposal to the member of the Executive Council, the MEC, for approval of the intent to declare. This is then followed by a public participation process that allows stakeholders to provide input, to raise any concerns if there are, and to understand the benefits of the protected area. And this process culminates when the MEC signs the final declaration. So this systematic approach ensures that every protected area we are involved with has a legal framework, has community support, and is of ecological value. Next slide, please. Yeah, so following this approach, the Tim Tilden Davis Nature Reserve was recently declared in December of last year. This reserve is just over 300 hectares, and it's a private farm. This declaration is particularly significant because of its strategic location. The reserve creates a corridor connecting two Ramsar sites, which are Lloyd and Vallei Nature Reserve to the south or to the bottom, and then the De Berg Nature Reserve, which is in the process of expanding to the north. So this connectivity between these areas is crucial for ecosystem functioning and species movement. This reserve also safeguards water resources in the form of a river that flows through the system, which forms part of the catchment that serves communities downstream. Next slide, please. So building on this success, we are currently working on a next project, which is the Verloor en Kloof Escarpment Nature Reserve, which will be just over 800 hectares in size. This proposed reserve is located below the escarpment and showcases remarkable habitat diversity in the form of grasslands, forests, wetland, rocky outcrops, and rivers, creating a mosaic of ecosystems that support a variety of species. When this reserve is declared, it will only protect these habitat and species, but a crucial piece in the regional conservation network we are working towards. Next slide, please. Okay, so unlike our previous examples of individual properties, the proposed Steenkampsberg protected environment represents a landscape scale approach. This protected environment will be declared over multiple properties, creating a conservation area of just over 9,500 hectares, which will significantly enlarge the protected area network, and it will also link many of the already existing protected areas. So this multi-property approach showcases how biodiversity stewardship can bring multiple landowners and conservation organizations together. Thank you. Next slide, please. Thanks. So once these areas are declared, we engage with stakeholders responsible for managing wetlands and these protected environments to advise, initiate, and facilitate continuation of stewardship within these areas. Next slide, please. So biodiversity stewardship fundamentally recognizes private and communal landowners as custodians of their land. It encourages the sustainable management of natural resources alongside daily land use activities. So this creates a partnership where conservation and productive land use can coexist. It can involve voluntary agreements ranging from informal to legally binding, supported by national legislation. For example, nature reserves and protected environments, as I previously mentioned. These declared sites create a platform that enhance ecological resilience and support human well-being through delivering ecosystem services that Kyle mentioned earlier. There are a few benefits of biodiversity stewardship, which includes legal protection and professional advice to oppose development applications and decisions, potential negative effects on the protected environment. Access to financial mechanisms, including tax benefits, ecotourism development opportunities, and there are various other funding sources available that can support the management of these protected areas. And then also the access to expert knowledge, skills, and tools to sustainably manage the habitats and biodiversity within these sites. So we try to have ongoing stewardship relationship with landowners, which is obviously subject to funding and capacity. So we do help where we can, and there are various post-declaration options available. I'll give you a few examples. Okay. So infographics concisely communicate various conservation topics that are easy to read and to interpret. But they break down complex concepts, and that's why we created a few of these how-to infographics. One focuses on biodiversity stewardship, so it essentially summarizes what I've been telling you, what it is, the different options available, the benefits, and it also lists a few post-declaration support options that are out there. Then we've also created 2 flyers specifically on citizen science platforms, BirdLife and iNaturalist. They are just basic how-to guides to empower land users or landowners and managers to get to know the species that are on the lands that they work in, and to give them ownership and a sense of pride with what they have and what they see. This also, of course, contributes to the research databases, which also then links to conservation. Looking ahead, we are in the process of creating a few other infographics and have a few others lined up for the coming years, all to just give back to landowners and to empower them and to give them the tools and skills, just to better manage and better understand the environment they work in. Thank you. Next slide, please. Then we're also making use of technology options available to inform practices, in this case specifically with remote sensing application. Just to mention that with all these things we are developing, we are only trying to enhance the information that landowners and managers have access to. We never prescribe or tell people what they have to do. So all these tools are just to assist them to better manage and better understand. So remote sensing technology offers valuable aerial perspectives, which isn't always as obvious when you're in the field. So some applications it is useful for is in grazing management, to identify which camps need to be rested, for example, for burning planning, determining appropriate fire intervals, and also management assessment by quantifying the effects of interventions over time. So what is great about this tool is that you can go back into the past and look over multiple years throughout different seasons to see what is occurring within a system. What you are seeing at the moment on the slide is Middleton Nature Reserve as an example, where different indices were applied, which all give you different information about the site in terms of moisture, the health of the vegetation, and when it has last burned. So it's all very valuable information just to empower landowners and managers. Thanks. Next slide, please. Okay, so BirdLife South Africa and the Escarpment Bird Club established the Steenkampsberg birding routes to help guide and advise people who want to explore the countryside around Dalstroom. The purpose of the birding routes is to create awareness about high elevation habitats and their species, while also creating financial incentive for landowners to conserve the biodiversity within the landscape. There's a dedicated website that provides more information, for example, recommended recommendations, various species lists, awareness materials, and emergency contact details. The website provides information about birds, but also about dragonflies, butterflies, frogs, wildflowers, geology, and human history. Signboards were erected in Dalstroom and along each route with a QR code that directs visitors to the website. Next, please. Okay, so wetland policy and advocacy is where we engage with developments and policies that impact white-winged flufftail and wetlands. Next, please. Okay, so just to say, as BirdLife South Africa, we do support sustainable developments and renewable energy initiatives. However, it is just key that they must be located in appropriate places. We use the mitigation hierarchy to guide our advocacy efforts, ensuring that development impacts are first avoided, then minimized, and only at the last resort offset through appropriate compensation measures. We review environmental impact assessments by identifying bird-specific risks that are often missed by general environmental consultants, including things like collision vulnerabilities, habitat displacement effects, and migration corridor impacts that could have far-reaching consequences. By ensuring adequate assessment of predicted species risks, we help developers avoid costly project delays and legal challenges down the line, benefiting both conservation and development outcomes. We actively promote proven mitigation strategies and adaptive management approaches that elevate industry standards, creating win-win scenarios for conservation and development. And then we position conservation as compatible with responsible development rather than as an obstruction. This collaborative approach builds trust and achieves better outcomes for all stakeholders. Thanks. Next slide, please.
Right. Thanks, Mars. Yeah, so I think it also, as Marlize commented on all these applications and the policy and advocacy team as well, really saw that for consultants that are needing to assess the presence of white-winged flufftail and mitigate impacts to them, it was quite a challenge because of that cryptic behavior and significant knowledge gaps, which we are trying to work on. And so we saw the need to, again, try to communicate guidelines for surveying the bird, so using some passive monitoring equipment. And that has been really refined over time with camera traps, so using motion-detected cameras to pick up the bird, as well as using acoustic devices. But more importantly is the use of the habitat suitability model for the bird, which we can use to predict the likelihood of occurrence at these sites where developments are proposed. And so the audience is really for avifaunal specialists as well as developers, so that they're aware of the needs of the species and some of the mitigation measures. And the guidelines not only serve the white-winged flufftail, but can be used for the general cryptic waterbird community of these high elevation wetlands. So things like other flufftail species or rallids, just the rallid group as a whole. And again, these were just recently published, so you can also find them freely available on our website. It includes the habitat suitability model. Yeah, so please do spread the good news. Right, and then just to end off with the last one is wetland awareness. So, Marlize.
Thank you, Carl. Yeah, so wetland awareness is just about communicating the plight of white-winged flufftail and wetlands through various public media platforms. And one of the ways we do this is by attending the Flufftail Festival, which is all about inspiring the next generation to love our wetlands. So the Flufftail Festival is held in celebration of World Wetlands Day. This year it was held at Maryvale Nature Reserve, where 30 learners from the Bertram's Boys and Girls Club of South Africa were brought into direct contact with wetland ecosystems. The festival offered an educational experience, which included an interactive talk on wetlands and white-winged flufftail, a practical wetland demonstration showing ecosystem functions, and a bird identification workshop, which was followed by a guided birding experience in the nature reserve. So the day's primary goal was to help learners appreciate and love wetlands and all the animals they host, and hopefully for them to take that information back home to tell their family and friends about it. So next year, the Flufftail Festival will be hosted in Dahlstrom, which is great to bring this important educational initiative directly to part of our work here in the high elevation wetland systems we work in, and to the communities that live alongside these critical ecosystems. Thanks.
Right, and then also Kurt mentioned the books. So yes, we've worked with volunteer authors and illustrators, and this has been a beautiful example of how literature and art has come together to tell a conservation story that makes the flufftail and wetlands accessible to children. And so we targeted two different age groups. The first book, Run Until You Can Fly, written by Brenda Daniels and illustrated by Amy Jane Jenkins, follows the story of Saro. He's a young flufftail and he's learning to fly, and he's accompanied by his friends, a wattled crane and an African clawless otter, and they go on an adventure through the wetland. And then the second book is for an older age group, Iffy and Zenzi Go Birding, written by Kirsty Carl and illustrated by Colleen Miller. And this follows two pups or two dogs that go on a birding day with their owners, and they go to an open water body system and a vegetated wetland, and they experience different bird communities. And I think you can guess what it concludes with. Yeah. And so, yeah, these stories have really been a great resource. Again, recently launched, freely available. We have some limited hard copies at head office. So we're really trying to target school classrooms and libraries so that as many kids can have access to these books as possible. So if you are in the education sector, you're welcome to go pick up a book, and hopefully, kids will read it and enjoy these stories. So we've really ended up with what some of the objectives that we're working on and looking ahead. But we also just wanted to maybe just discuss, how you can contribute to wetland conservation if this is something that you would like to do. And I think one of the most important things is just learning and experiencing wetlands. They are such interesting ecosystems, hotspots of biodiversity within the landscape, and they really have such unique species associated with them, especially these seasonal environments where these very distinct dry and wet seasons, and you can see how life changes over the year to conclude with these incredible flowering events in these systems. And there are many nature reserves out there that have these high elevation wetlands, so you can explore them. The photos I have up is Verloren Valley Nature Reserve. It's located here in the Steenkampsberg, where Marlize has been talking about, near Dahlstrom. And then also, if you are engaging with them, to just observe ethical birding practices, so trying to avoid using playbacks. It's a bird community that is very acoustically driven, highly territorial, narrow window period for breeding. And so really trying to just limit disturbance to these species, and as well as trying to avoid flushing. And then also being able to engage in the public participation process. So this is really open up to you, and it's an opportunity for you to either support some developments like a nature reserve or protected area expansion. So do look out for some of those support letters that we put out there for these nature reserves, as well as opposing developments that may not be compatible with wetland conservation as well. And then we also encourage you to please share these conservation resources that we're trying to publish. And yeah, we're at the phase now where we're really just trying to distribute and get the message out. And if you also feel so inclined, you can also donate towards the cause, just to specify it's for White-winged Flufftail. Yeah, so thank you very much. We'd just like to thank all our sponsors that make this work possible, all of you. There's many individuals who donate and contribute towards the bigger BirdLife South Africa, so thank you for that. Thank you for enabling us to do this work, and many individuals, so thank you. If you'd like to get in touch with us, there's our email addresses. So yeah, thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Carl, and thank you very much, Marlize. I'm sure that if the audience's audio was on, would be hearing a very loud round of applause. Thank you very much. Fascinating topic, and just incredibly illuminating to hear the two of you talk about it. I mean, it's a very, very complex project that you two are working on. And as you can see from the reactions at the bottom of the screen, I think everybody's very impressed with your efforts. We've got a number of questions coming in. No, Carl and Marlize, you deserve it. And to the audience here, keep the claps coming. These are two fantastic people that we're learning from today. We've got a number of questions coming out. I would encourage you in the audience to add some more, and we'll get to them soon. But sure, where to begin? What a varied project that you have. You're working in habitats, you're working with landowners, you're working in so many different areas. And in fact, it's great to see you two, because here at the head office in Joburg, we don't get to see you much. You both are based quite far out of town. So yeah, it's great to see you. I was curious as to the proportion of your year that you spend in the office versus that you spend in the wetlands, in the habitats that you're working on protecting.
Yeah, so during those summer months, that wet season, it's really intense field work, which is really backbreaking and hard on the legs in these wetlands, but we really enjoy it. And yeah, essentially then sort of winter period is time for desktop work, and as well as Marlize meeting with landowners and providing that post-declaration support. Yeah.
I can imagine that, yeah, it's a bit of a welcome rest when winter rolls around and you can spend time being a bit more sedentary than usual. But I'm sure you're aching to get back out there when the rains begin again. So what drives this sort of fallow season for you? I suppose with reference to your flagship species, we've got some questions asking, is it migratory? So perhaps that's the reason why you slow down this time of year?
Yes, yeah. So as I said, these high elevation systems are very seasonal, with very distinct wet and dry seasons. And during the dry season, productivity really drops. It's essentially just brown, and not these pretty pictures we've been showing you. And during that time, a lot of these birds will either migrate latitudinally or altitudinally and go down to the coast or the low veld where conditions are better for food resources. And the white-winged flufftail is part of that. It follows the same, and that's something we are exploring, and making some good headway. So yeah, very excited about that.
Yeah, I wish I could migrate altitudinally down to Durban. I mean, it's absolutely freezing at the moment.
Yeah, they got the right idea. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Clever birds. So
we're used to seeing geese and, all other sorts of, the classic view of geese migrating in a V formation or all other migrants. They're very visible. Do we suspect that birds, these kind of cryptic species like flufftails, migrate at night, or do they have some kind of powers of invisibility? Why is it that we never see them out in the open?
Yeah, generally water birds migrate at night, so that does limit our visibility of seeing them. But there are instances, historical records of some low elevation records, as well as collisions in infrastructure and that. So the bird is moving. Most water birds move at night, so it's hard to detect that or see that.
Yeah, I mean, what an incredibly secretive species. I think you're one of perhaps a few dozen people who've been able to see them in the wild multiple times. So count yourselves lucky. We've got a question from George Ledeck, who's curious as to why the flufftails were recently changed from critically endangered to endangered, I believe, is the current status, according to BirdLife South Africa's recently published Red Data book.
Yeah, no, sure. So with the last assessment, it was based on very little information, very few records. And that's really, as I say, the elusive nature of the bird. So it was really hard to find them. But using passive monitoring equipment and refining those techniques, and also the description of the bird's call, was really opened the door to trying to find more presence records for the species. And so we've conducted 5 years of intense monitoring all along the escarpment, surveying on private and protected land. And yeah, we've managed to find a lot more localities, but still just the nature of the wetlands and being threatened, that doesn't mean the bird is least concerned. There are still major threats that it's facing, but through the modeling that we did, we've seen that, and based on the IUCN criteria, South Africa's hosting a larger population than previously thought. And so, yeah, it's really improved knowledge that helped with that change.
Carl, am I correct in saying that it was once thought that the populations in Ethiopia and South Africa were linked? Is that still the case, or has that understanding changed?
Genetics shows that they're very similar, but that could be various other reasons as well, and very limited sample size for that study. But the bird is breeding in South Africa, it's breeding in Ethiopia, so it's likely that we're dealing with distinct populations, but there could be a potential for gene mixing somewhere as we figure out the migration routes of the bird. Yeah.
Okay, interesting. So still lots to learn. Plenty to learn. Okay. You've touched a bit on the threats that wetlands are facing. And it just got me thinking, is there an understanding of how stable wetlands generally are, in terms of deep time? Are wetlands, or at least the wetlands you're working with, are they fairly recent on the landscape, or have they been around for, a good few thousand years?
Yeah, no, these wetlands that we're working with, at least, for example, Middelpunt Wetland, which is it's the first confirmed breeding site of the bird in South Africa. That's estimated to be around 10,000 years old. So they are very old systems, but in geological time, all wetlands eventually have a lifespan. But the rate that we're seeing within our lifetime is that within generations, some of these wetlands, these thousands of years old wetlands, are being degraded. Of particular concern is the high organic content in substrate and these winter fires that burn down into the substrate and can really damage wetlands. So we need to make the distinction between these natural wetlands as well as wetlands that are artificially formed as well, and that they don't necessarily support the same communities that we see in these very old wetland systems.
You mentioned fires, Carl, and we do have a question from Ted van der Meulen, who's curious as to, well, he asks, are we still burning? I assume he means, are we still burning wetland areas? Are we doing fire breaks in these areas? I know this is something you go into detail in your guidelines, but perhaps you could give us a brief answer there.
Yeah, sure. fires are essential to these systems. They evolved in a landscape that is driven by fire and grazing. And so it's very important that they continue to burn, but it just needs to be applied correctly in terms of the interval, the frequency, and the intensity. And that's something that the guidelines go into. We also provide a decision tree to help landowners make the decision of whether or not to burn that year. And essentially, we're trying to advocate for cool fires, and heterogeneity or diversity in fire regimes, but to really look at your system and apply not a regimental fire regime, but to really adapt towards what is currently happening. Is it a drought year? Is it a wet year? Is there grazing? So, removing vegetation. Or is it only fire that's going to remove that vegetation? So yeah, it's really important for the white-winged flufftail that there's not an accumulation of dead plant matter building up in the lower story, because that can exclude the bird over time.
Mm. Yeah, I suppose that brings into focus just how important Marlize's work in terms of stewarding landowners is. And I know it's a key point of your recently published guidelines that it's supposed to be something digestible, sort of written in layman's terms, and something that's easily accessible. Why is that so important, in particular with wetlands?
Liz, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, thanks, Kurt. I think there's unfortunately a history of wetlands being mismanaged, where incorrect information was provided to farmers and landowners of what to do with wetlands, basically. So I think there's a long-standing misunderstanding, so that we are trying to rectify. We are trying to just reestablish in everyone's minds that wetlands are very important, and managing them in the correct way doesn't only benefit plants and animals, but us ultimately through the provisioning of the ecosystem services. So it's basically just almost bringing everything back into balance, creating that link again between the environment and our well-being.
Yeah, well, thank you on behalf of humanity, I guess, for the work you're doing, and particularly South Africa's citizens. Because, I wonder what we'd be doing without people like you, keeping these kinds of incredibly beautiful places. I mean, the photos you were showing earlier of the various places that you work in, I'm sure have made a number of us jealous. What an incredible office to have. Marlize, to elaborate on this idea of keeping wetlands healthy and the work that needs to be done, is it quite an active process? Do landowners need to be actively making decisions? For example, we've got a question from Susan asking about the recent introduction of buffaloes to nails flay. I'm sure this is something that we're aware of, but in general, is it called for to make these tweaks to try and rewild, I suppose, to use a bit of a buzzword that's been thrown around a lot recently?
Yeah, thanks, good. I think it's just important to note that every wetland system is unique, and will react differently to different things being done to it. But I think the guidelines were written in such a way that gives the basic guidelines and directions that you can take and adapt and make your own for each wetland. Just to improve constantly. And I think it's also important to continuously engage with landowners as new information becomes available, and just to give back to them, as I mentioned before, to make sure that they are aware of the latest developments and the latest information. But it's I think we're all continuously learning, and we all need to adapt. The whole adaptive management is continuous throughout the process. So I think we'll never reach a point where it's just one way to do something and that's that. So I think for that reason it is important to continuously engage with landowners and managers.
Wow. I think that's a pretty good answer. I mean, Susan's specific question being about buffaloes and nails flay, I suppose, it depends, I imagine at one point there were these very large ungulate type of animals roaming through these areas, and perhaps not so many anymore. So I guess it just depends. And I guess, as Kyle said, these are kind of ever-changing landscapes. So it's quite hard to try and approximate what they may have been like 100 years ago, 500 years ago. We've got a question on the current population estimates of the white-winged flufftail based on best knowledge. Do you have a rough number to give us there?
Yeah, it's just under 2,000. So yeah, not better than 250.
I assume
Yeah.
250 was the last best guess.
Yes. Well, yeah, actually in South Africa even less. So yeah, I think that was the global population size. Yeah, and South Africa really is becoming quite key to the future of the species. Unfortunately, the situation in Ethiopia is quite dire, with only one site really being suitable for the bird or wetland. So yeah, it's really important that we continue doing this work in the country.
Yeah, what an incredible, incredibly hopeful number to be aware of. 2,000 is, it's definitely a big step up from what we thought in the past, but that doesn't mean that you guys get to go on holiday anytime soon, because we've touched on some of the threats that these birds face and that wetlands in general face. A question that I've got is, you ran through some of the reasons why the flufftail is a flagship species for your project. I assume one of those is that it's particularly sensitive to changes in the habitat. What are some of the most drastic changes that can occur to a wetland? What are some of these more obvious threats?
Yeah, so essentially, it's something that's changed within its catchment in terms of water inputs or sediment or nutrients, things like that. And essentially how that's reflected within the wetland is you have these natural pioneer species that respond to these changes. So we're talking about Typha capensis and Phragmites, which are so bulrushes and reeds. And they essentially form these monocultures that just replace these diverse sedge meadows. So it's they totally replace the sedge meadows, and then you have a total change in the community that they support in terms of the bird community and etc. So it's really important. So if you see that happening, there's clearly something happening that needs to be addressed, and often people focus on the expansion of these reeds and bulrushes, but it's really just a symptom of something that's happening that needs to be addressed. So getting to the cause, or at least trying to address, if it's something like excess nutrients within water, trying to at least treat the water before it enters the wetland system. If the cause is something that's out of your control.
So, Carl, in the Steenkampsberg area that yourself and Marlize operate in, if you had, some kind of magic wand, what would, I'm sure this is going to be a tough question to answer, but, if you had to limit it to one or two things that you could change just like that, threats that these habitats are facing, what would they be?
Yeah, at least for me, I think water quality is a big one. So, having livestock numbers that exceed what is recommended for that area, that's a lot of excess nutrients going into the system, and whatever you do within the catchment is going to end up at the bottom of the valley, which is where the wetland's sitting. And we're seeing that with the recent publication of the red list, that a lot of the water birds are there's a lot more that are threatened than previous. So there's definitely something happening with our water quality. And then I think the other is probably alien invasive trees. So these are supposed to be grassland landscapes, and yes, we acknowledge that there's a lot of trees or exotic trees that form that have utility for landowners, but there's some infestations that serve no purpose, and there's a lot of water that's extracted from our catchments as a result of those. So I think we could really help our wetlands by removing those, which is something we're also trying to work towards.
Any particularly problematic species? I assume wattles, Australian wattle?
Yeah, black wattle, blue gum, and pine. Those three are generally what we find in our grassland biome. Yeah.
All right, thanks. There's another question that I've got here. I'd love to just answer a few more. I know we kind of running late on time, but there's still some really great questions I'd love to hear. And, it's fantastic to have you guys here to be able to answer them. So we've got a few questions around wetlands outside of your sort of area of operation. In particular, Geswane and Rustenburg is being mentioned. The Waterberg is being mentioned. I know you focus on high altitude, but I wonder, do you have partners throughout the country that are working in wetlands that you're not able to cover yourself?
Yeah, no, there's a phenomenal wetland community out there that's working hard in various parts of our country, all the way even to the Western Cape. So yeah, there's provincial wetland forums. We can give those details to you if you want to contact us. There's the South African Wetland Society doing fantastic work as well. So yeah, there's a real drive to try and protect our wetlands as we've become more aware of the threats they're facing. Yeah.
Well, that's great. Great to hear. I'm glad. It takes a village to save a wetland. It's the classic expression, right? Speaking of sort of wetland communities, wetland conservation efforts, you did mention very briefly, you touched on Ramsar. Perhaps it would be useful to explore that. And I know that the Ramsar COP is coming up. That's in the Conference of Parties. That's in Vic Falls, right? And will you be attending that?
Yeah, no, I'll have the fortune of attending that with some of my colleagues, and it's really an opportunity for us to network and develop relationships with our partners, with South African delegates as well. And we're going to distribute some of those wetland management guidelines. We're also in the process of working on a summary of those guidelines and trying to translate it into some of the major languages in Southern Africa. So we're really just trying to make it as easy as possible to adopt some of these guidelines.
Great. Yeah, I'm sure your efforts will be very well rewarded in time. But what is Ramsar in general? What's a Ramsar site? We hear that term quite a lot. What is it?
So it's the Convention on Wetlands. It's an international convention signed by several nations at the time. It was signed in the town of Ramsar, which is where it gets its name. And it essentially is a status that identifies a wetland of international importance. So the wetland needs to meet certain criteria set by the Ramsar Secretariat or Convention. And that really just gives us another protective layer on our wetlands. It gives it an sort of international recognition and a good incentive for national efforts to protect that site and manage it correctly.
Great. Yeah, that sounds like a very important thing. Is it something that you can apply for a wetland to become a Ramsar site, or how's that determined?
It is, yeah, through your country's respective committee for that. But yeah, for example, in South Africa, the site at least needs to have some sort of nature reserve status for us to then propose it as a candidate Ramsar site.
And how many do we have in South Africa, roughly speaking? Don't forget that you're being recorded.
Oh, goodness. The numbers totally escape me right now.
Okay. Well, I know that
we have a
there's
few
a couple in your area, right? 3 or 4 in that
yes.
sort of Steenkampsberg area.
Yeah, actually we have 3 now in Mpumalanga. So the first was Fuller and Fillet Nature Reserve, then Middelpunt Nature Reserve where the White-winged Flufftail is, and now recently De Berg Nature Reserve. So really all just focused here in the Steenkampsberg, which just shows the importance of this mountain plateau with all these wetland systems.
And I speak under correction, but I believe in Sekeni, which is another BirdLife South Africa site, or at least a site with involvement of our organization, that's in KZN, sort of fairly close to Underberg. That's a Ramsar site too.
Yes, that's correct, and it's one of the largest high elevation systems. Truly magical place. So, yeah, I really do encourage you if you want to go visit Sekeni Nature Reserve. There's a community lodge. Our resident community bird guide is stationed there and can host you and give, see that you have a wonderful time there.
Yeah, just send us an email. You can email conversations, at birdlife.org.za if you want to learn anything more, either about Nsekeni or about anything we've discussed tonight, and we will make sure that your emails are answered. This might be cheeky. One last question. In fact, there's been about 6 of these in the Q&A, and it's a question around using trackers to try and understand where these birds are going. Is there anything to speak on there, Carl? Or
all I can say is, we're working towards it. There's some new technology that's making this possible. The challenge at the time has been really finding a device that's small enough to be ethically viable. So a device typically needs to be 3 to 5% of the bird's body mass. And the technology doesn't exist. So but there's been some recent developments, some very generous collaborations. So watch the space.
All right, maybe at some point we'll have you back on and we can discuss some developments in that area. But Carl, Marlize, thank you very much for joining, sharing your incredible knowledge and the fantastic and inspiring work that you do. It's really, really wonderful to have had you online, as well as all the many participants that were watching, I'm sure, very closely and learning a lot about wetlands. Very misunderstood and perhaps, underappreciated part of our landscapes. So thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having us.
Enjoy the rest of your evenings, everybody. And Marlize and Carl, keep well and hopefully see you all soon.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.